that's what we should look at, Tom, and maybe it's one of the things that comes out of that meeting, is that we do something like this, but with young people talking. I think it'd be just excellent.
Why are we making this video? What's your message to all of us?
Well, Thomas, I've come to a stage in my life, really, where I've had some extraordinary experiences, which have helped me to grow into the person I am now. And I'd just like to spend some time on the latest experience that I've had. About 4 years ago, my brother developed dementia. It was an extraordinary change in him, because first his speech went, and then his memory went, and then his logic went, and then he kind of used to get angry, and I didn't know at times what to do. He used to get so angry with me, and I was on my own, basically, trying to help and support him. And at a certain stage, about 2 years into it, I found that I was becoming quite negative. And I found that I was trapped, and I really wanted to kind of say, what am I going to do? And I remember distinctly about April of 2015, and my brother, I was out wandering and having these feelings, and I said, well, Cyril, my brother, isn't going to change because he's ill, so I have to change. And therefore I started this journey, or continued on the journey that I was doing, looking at that. I changed my routines, I started to do more meditation and reflection and walking as much as I could within the context of my brother's illness, because it was a full-time job, caring for him. And what developed over those 2 years now, 2.5 years really, is something extraordinary in my life. And some of the questions I had to ask myself were these. The first and most important, I think, was, who am I? Who am I? And I really had to look at this because I read so much, and I always knew that I was greater than the sum of my parts. I always knew that. And I've had experiences that there's something greater, that I'm just not Ray, who used to be an ex-teacher, who does work for the Alzheimer's Society, who reads a lot, who works with students. That, I was just not that. There was something deeper to me. And I had research into that, and I had experiences of what I would call universal consciousness. The other thing is I had to ask again, what is my role in life? What am I being asked to do? In the immediate situation, I was obviously looking after my brother. But what is I actually called to be and to do? And the thing that struck me is, I'm called to be and to do what is happening now. What is happening now? There's no use going beyond it, And one of the things I learned was, right, there's some reason for my brother's illness, which is going to help me to grow as an individual. So I entered as full as I could into supporting him, as well as supporting myself as much as I could at that time. What is happening now? And that for me is the second. After who am I, I've got to look at what is the now, not to think about the future or the past. A third thing I realised really was that we all talk about good experiences and bad experiences. And my own feeling is that, in fact, there's no such difference. It is all that is there now, as it is. And it's what we do with it. And as long as we reflect on it, and reflect upon the experiences, we will actually grow. We all have looked back at the times, haven't we, to those experiences. Oh yeah, 5 years ago I did that, I see what happened, and I move on. The trick now, and the knack is that this experience is happening now. Let me enter into it fully now, because there is only the now anyway. Enter into it fully now, and then that would kind of help me kind of grow, into what I'm supposed to be, whatever that is. So there's no such good thing as bad experience. It's how we reflect on it.
It's a perspective that we have on the environment, and on ourselves.
On ourselves,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And how do we reflect on that? How do we kind of take time to go through that? Because we are all human beings, and everyone, all of us have been through down moments, down times, situations where we say, oh God, and as a human being, the danger is that we get trapped into that, and if we don't reflect on it as we move through life, then the rest of life remains negative. And the rest of life, because as it were, you have a scratch on your hand and you start picking at it, and then eventually it becomes an open wound and an open sore. So it is important to look at that and to look at those experiences. And I wouldn't want to wish I cared for my brother for 4 years, and I kind of wouldn't wish that on anybody, to looking after that. And there's thousands and thousands of carers in the UK who are looking after people, not only with dementia, but with other diseases, etc. Also, what is actually sacred in my life? What is sacred? What is, for want of a better word, but I don't like the word really, is, what is holy in my life? What is the wholesome things in my life? And I had to reflect then my own life and my own life's journey. And one of the things that I came around, apart from many things, through this reflection, when I was looking after my brother, was, it had always been there, is about the ecosystem, about ecology, about sustainability, about our life. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But the importance is that we are children of the earth. We are children of the earth. We've grown through the earth. We've grown through the earth, and we are earthy beings. In fact, the word for earth is humus in Latin, the Latin word, H-U-M-U-S, humus, which is very much like human. And so the two are there. This is where we are. And even the story of Adam meets earth. And now sometimes we have to kind of revert towards that. So these are the things that were starting at the very beginning, and which I kind of had to revisit when Cyril became ill.
So just to sum up what you were saying, it's almost as if you're saying that the perspective of good and bad, which in principle doesn't exist, lives in our mind, because our mind projects, reads the environment. So if our projection of the environment is quote-unquote negative, we have a bad experience, quote-unquote. But by you realizing that you cannot change your brother, Cyril, you had to change your perspective on the environment, on the situation. You were able to actually get amazing gifts from the universe, from life, and you learned a lot, and you grew as a person, as an individual, because you saw this event through different lenses, through different eyes, and you came to some very interesting and almost wholesome conclusions about life.
Yes, exactly, right? Tom. Exactly. And I think that whole thing about the mind is so important. You know me well enough to know that I'm always talking about the ego. But I just want to stress this now, because I think it is important. All of us, I think generally, and this is generally, all of us have different brains, but I believe we all have one mind. Yeah. And it's the mind, and we all, in quotations again, suffer from the good things of the mind, because and the ego, which is part of the mind, because it's that gets up out of bed in the morning, goes to do our work, look after children, whatever it is that we have to do. The other side of it can be quite negative. And we know from the neurosciences, by our very nature, the brain, all the stuff that the brain is doing, is prone towards negativity. And that's why we've got to bring beauty into our lives as we go along. But just to go back, I think the whole thing about the ego is so important, because most of us, because we are one mind, we suffer from the same things by and large as human beings, but we never talk about it. Yeah. So the down times, am I good enough? Have I got confidence enough? Do I look handsome? Will he or she go out with me? Will I be able to take on that job? And it's usually negative stuff, saying, no, you can't do that, you can't do the other. We all hear these little voices and the chattering in our heads,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that is an extremely important point of my own thing, is really looking at that and in fact, first of all, telling the the ego not to come into my mind. Then secondly, it's by taming it, and eventually then you can actually embrace it, you know, and then you just know, and then it becomes, it knows where it can come in your
It's a
thinking.
balance.
Yeah, there's a pattern, exactly, the patterns of things. Yeah. So, and that's a good reminder, Thomas, because to say that,
Yeah. Well, since we're on the topic of the ego, who is Ray, and why is Ray Ray?
Yeah. Well, this is the whole thing. Is one of the things we're both smiling because we talked about Tom. I've talked about this so often, and he knows I talk to a lot of younger people about this. All of us, in fact, the majority of us, kind of identify. How do we identify ourselves? And we usually identify ourselves. We don't just say I am. We usually say, oh right, I am a doctor, or I am a brickie, or I am a student. We always, or by what we own. Oh, I own a car, I own a big house, Even we identify with our children. Oh yeah, I've got 3 fine children, and we identify with that.
Yeah, the external factors were opposed to internal factors.
Well, exactly. And so this is because and unfortunately most people live their lives by what they identify. And eventually it will happen, and I think this is part of the reason why we've got this gift of living longer, is there'll be little opportunities along the way to kind of question that, but most of us don't pick it up. Most of us, in fact, we identify with that, and this is who I am. And I've met during my own lifetime so many people who are not really growing into their potential. Because life is about potentiality, that whole thing of things burgeoning and blossoming, and a majority isn't that. If it was, our world system, as we look around at the moment in time, is quite destructive. Because I would suggest, by and large, most of us do live out of fear, and do live out of desperation, under stress. And I learned over those, even just before my brother's illness, that if you kind of look at yourself as something greater than yourself, we know, for instance, that we live in a holographic universe. That means we're greater than the sum of our parts. And it's like those Russian dolls within one another. As you, take one out, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And that is what we are. We also know the holographic universe means that the universe is in ourselves, is in my little finger. So we've got the two things. This is the beauty of a lot of the scientific investigation, which I won't go into now, which I think is quite good, which verifies the new way of living. And I'm just going to go through things because I really want to touch about what I said about the ecosystem. I just really want to touch upon that because that to me has gelled over certainly almost the last year or so, that somehow or the other, the ecosystem is something of the principles that we should kind of live on and live by, and what it is, these are the principles. Let me just go through the principles which I think is there, and I have to read some of these because there's quite a few of them. So these are the principles we should live by. First of all, the universe is alive at its foundations. It is an alive, unique entity and is kept alive by eternal energy. To explain that, everything is energy. Everything is alive. Everything is active, dynamic. Everything. We try to control everything, and we've been brought up, particularly our generations, and particularly the last 500 years, through the mechanistic way of looking at the universe. We want to control it. We want to use it. And that's what we've been doing, using the universe, particularly our Earth, for our own kind of growth, hence the crisis in the moment with climate change, etc. But the universe is alive and active. And it is so important to realise that. Let me explain that. Everything is connected. Things we wouldn't think of being connected are connected. So even the trees are connected to us. even the animals are connected to us. The animal world particularly has this strong sense of energy and almost like energy and a sense of kind of unity and interconnection.
Yeah, connection.
They're all connected. You look at the birds flying in the sky, they're following a pathway. You kind of look at the fish in the sea, all those shoals of fish. There's an energy there, and they tapped into it. We used to have it as human beings, but we've lost it. You can see it with dogs sometimes. They can actually know where their master and mistress is, you know, at different places. They've done all experiments on this. But we have lost it. We've lost that interconnection and that interdependence.
And if I may add, also the mutual partnership that we have with nature. As without nature we cannot live, and there are certain things that we believe that we can do, but without certain items. For example, there's bacteria within our bodies that help us digest food just as much as fungi living, feeding off the roots of the trees, which help decompose and synthesize some minerals that the tree can do. So there's this, like you were saying, there's this pathway between everything. There's this energy cycling, but there's also this mutual understanding that with one, that there has to be a mutual understanding between different species, and species are meant to collaborate together. If not, you kind of break the cycle, and that's what we're doing, like you were saying, with the mechanistic idea that we are breaking this pattern and we are destroying our ecosystem.
That's right. I think absolutely, Thomas. And the everything is a living system. Remember that. Do please remember that. And they're organisms, they're parts of organisms, and there's community of organisms, and there's networks within networks within networks, and they're all self-organising. And this is the beauty of it. It's all self-organising. And as you say, Thomas, it's cyclical. Mm-hmm. Everything is cyclical. Nothing is wasted. Yeah. And it's also flexible, it's diverse, and it's alive. And the ecosystem is non-linear, so it can go in any direction. And the scientists have said this about Heisenberg, for instance, around unpredictability. So it can go anywhere. It's not linear, you know. And the whole creative thing, unfortunately, we spend our lives linearly. That's the way we spend our lives, you know. We get up, we go this, we do that, we do this, and we go get married and all that. All really, really good things, but it's all kind of linear, you know. But we've got to learn to change and adapt, to be flexible and be diverse, you know. And parts, as you were saying, Thomas, can feed back into other parts. And one of the sad things about the Earth at the moment is that all the destructions that's going on in the Earth by, for instance, the fertilizers, which is killing all this interconnection, all these living systems, all these organisms, it's just killing it. And there's 5 big companies that are in fact taken over, which governments are bought into for fertilizer, which is killing the seeds and killing the earth. And this alive earth now is in fact being poisoned. You know, and we've got to kind of look, when you look at our lives, and when I'm looking at my life, how do I live my life? And I'll go back just through some of these things I've already said. I am a living system. Understand? I am self-organising. I am cyclical. I'm part of the whole cyclical phase. I am flexible, diverse and alive. I am in relationship to everything. I am connected to everything. This is what we are. And this is the natural way life should be. If we don't want to get into the spiritual way, this is the natural. And if we live by those principles, I believe, you know, the earth and humanity would be much more dynamic. More dynamic. Yes. Then finally, since life is unpredictable, and this is the biggie. We have to trust the process and study closely all the patterns that take part, but trust the process. And going back to our whole thing, Thomas said, you know, it's more important, the process is more important than the end product. Or as the Buddha said, it's more important to travel well than to arrive.
Very true.
You know, very true. It's more and more travel, so that we can actually take that journey. And that's why I go back to my brother. And thank goodness, for whatever reason, that was my journey, to travel well with him. It was one of the hardest things I had to do in my whole life. You know, it was that 4 years, you know, which taken its kind of toll, you know. So I just want to touch into some of the questions then on all that we should really be asking ourselves, and which I had to ask myself. But I think, you know, I would like to share these with you, you know, and I've touched them on already. So, what is the quality of my relationship with myself, you know, other people and the environment? What are my relationships like? Look back on one's relationships. What is my relationship like? You know, we can talk about war out there in the Middle East and the rest of it. Is there conflict in my life? Is there conflict within myself? Do I have conflict? What am I doing to resolve it? Is there conflict with other people? Is there conflict with the environment? And if any of these things are happening, the important thing is, in quotations, to kind of resolve it or to get help or support for it. Because if you don't, the first thing is, particularly in this era that we live in, you know, we're all interconnected, therefore that will be passed on to other people. By its very nature, it will be passed completely on to other, you know. And so the second thing is, am I aware that I'm connected to other people? Sometimes we have these things, they call them coincidences, don't they? I think the new word now is synchronicity. But you know, small things, you think of somebody and the next thing they phone. You know, you bump into somebody. This has happened to me all the time. The more and more you get in touch with yourself, the more synchronicities happen. And you're meeting people or reading stuff, or something comes on television and it's speaking to you. And for me, that's a way of saying, well, Ray, you're on the right path. I mean, do I find time for reflection within my life? Life is absolutely rushed around. Where has this year gone, for instance, 2016? And what is kind of a little bit sad is, I, as an older person, they say life gets quicker anyway. But a lot of younger people are saying this now. And it's partly because of our technology. We never have private times to ourselves. And I think, by the way, technology is brilliant. I think we'll be able to, you know, social media and all that's brilliant. But I think we've got to kind of say, you know, I think a bottle of wine's brilliant, you know. I think a bottle of wine's brilliant, you know, but there's no use my drinking 3 bottles of wine in one night.
Yeah, I would just like to add, I think you just touched a very sensitive and important topic on reflection. I mean, most people, like you say, we are so caught up with trying to pay the bills and getting work and trying to kind of climb the ladder, the social ladder in our society, that we don't take time for ourselves. And the time that we have, we tend to spend to catch up with friends or sleep or try to do things that make us happy, but we seldomly spend time truly with ourselves and just spend hours just being present with our own beings. And that lack of reflection is also, I think, one of the biggest issues, that we are not able to see where we're going, as we are constantly running to achieve something that we don't know, because somebody else is saying you should go here, but here is not a physical place. It's this idea, it's this philosophy. And without understanding this philosophy, we chase it constantly until we reach one point where we are burnt out or exhausted, and we ask ourselves why, or like you say, who am I? Why am I doing this? Am I really a bricklayer? Am I really a scientist? Am I really a photographer? What am I? Who am I? And how can I relate to my peers, to the environment, to Earth, to the universe? And I think that reflection is very important for people to undertake, to understand how to better fit in today's world and into our own life.
Yes, exactly, Thomas. And I really do think the whole question of time, I mean, scientists talk about time and timeless, but I think as time is really to look, and it reminds me of the story really about the guy that went along to the priest one day, and he asked him if he wanted to find God, and the priest said, yes, right, okay. He says, well, I can't see you until about a week, but he says, I just want you to do two things during the week. He says, at 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I just want you to touch your nose. And that's all I want to do, and then come back. And as the guy who was telling the story was going away, he said, what odd advice. And he says, anyway, so we started at 10 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, and then as the week went on, he kind of, he forgot, I forgot the 10 o'clock one. And then later, at the end of the week, he wasn't doing anything. And then he realised what the priest was saying, if you can't find time to do a silly little thing like this, you won't have time to find God. And I think we've got that, the reflective life, someone else, unreflected says an unreflected life is no life at all, right. But so reflection is so important, and time for oneself, and just change your routine. However difficult it is, it can be done. And that's what I had to do. I had to change my routine, The other one which I want to mention is, how do I respond to the difficult periods of my life? Now, we've touched on this. We've touched on this actually before. How do I respond to the difficult periods in my life? And finally is, do I enter fully into the process of what I am doing rather than thinking about the end product? So we have process. So these are all the different things that I've had to look at, within my own life, which I just want to kind of reflect on with you. There was just a couple of quotes I like to give to you from a couple of books, which is just from which I've been reading very recently, and which I think probably says it better than I am actually here, and which I like to speak to you about, say to you now. The first one's actually is about the soil, and it's from a woman whose name is Vandana Shiva, and she's a great woman in India. She studied as a physicist, and she's written books, and she had these small things about seed, and I came across this, which I think is just beautiful, and you must excuse my pronunciation of words here. Seed, which she says is bija in Sanskrit, shido in Japanese, zangzi in Chinese, seme in Italian, similar in Spanish, semence in French, same in German, is the self-urge of life to express herself in her diverse expressions, her abundance, her permanent renewal and rejuvenation. All life begins in seed. Seed is just not the source of life, it is the very foundation of our being. For millions of years, seed has evolved to give us the diversity and richness of life on the planet. We have the diversity of seeds because of the co-evolution and co-creation by nature and her farmers over 10,000 years. Seed does not only hold the memory of time, evolution and history, it also holds the memory of space, of the interactions within the web of life. And so she says really beautifully that whole thing about seed, which we have all kind of emerged from, and which we are all seeds of life, and the vitality and general, which unfortunately in a book she says a lot of these seeds are being poisoned by the fertilizers, etc. The other one I just like to speak about is just this latest book that I've been reading, is the New Universe and Human Nature. And by and large, I won't go into detail here, but the New Universe and Nature, and by and large, he's saying there's three parts to the whole kind of universe. Our present universe is there and present, from which we are growing on part of. And then you have the dark matter, which is kind of pushing the universe, which came in at the very beginning of time to hold us together. And beyond that, we've got the dark energy. But the authors here are saying that there's a big time happening within human nature itself, and we're going through this time. It's quite pivotal. And there's just a little chapter here, a passage I like to read. Another false assumption for many people is that the end of growth is immediately interpreted economically as meaning the death of progress and freedom. but biologically, the end of growth looks very different. We reach a certain size in adulthood. People whose bodies keep growing non-stop are suffering from the disease of gigantism. They become weak and they die. The same may be true of an economy. And this is important. This is the end of humanity's adolescence. It's a coming of age. And from here on, the growth of complexity in human civilization shouldn't be physical any longer, but intellectual, emotional, artistic, relational, and spiritual. Thank you.